Want to welcome everybody to, I think this is the third in our Build the Builder webinar series, where we take some time to demystify the art of agent building and walk everyone through how to build what have, up to this point have been relatively simple agents. But this is a way for us to really live our mission, which is to build the way the world works. And we are big believers that the future is for the builders, right? And not necessarily for the platforms, and that anybody can be a builder. And I think what personifies that, maybe more than anything, is the fact that I am hosting this. So I am our head of marketing. I went to college to study art history, so I am far from a technical person. But here I am, someone who builds agents and who leverages AI and creates automated workflows and does all of it. And if I can do it, you can do it. The way that I've got to where I am has been really just by being a curious person, um, and just experimenting and playing around with building certain different things. And I've been doing this now for probably close to 3 years, like really sort of heads down in the whole AI space. And what I found to be really, really interesting is that I think my initial curiosity was very much centered around how AI can help me outside of work. And over the last probably year and a half, and especially during my time here at Reejig, that interest has now sort of evolved into how AI can help me at work. And I think that that's probably where a lot of us are. So maybe we're earlier on in our journey, and we still want to understand how AI can help us personally. But being that I'm assuming most of us are sitting in an office or our home office or a co-working space or somewhere, we should be thinking about how AI is going to help us at work and maybe shape or reshape what work actually looks like. So, Kirst, can I just ask you, what is the general consensus on the poll answers if you're able to see that?
Ooh, yes. We have 52% on the first question. How comfortable are you with building AI agents? Say, I understand the concept, but haven't built one. 4% saying I've built and deployed agents already.
Huh,
33% saying I've experimented, but not in production. And then 11% I'm new to AI agents entirely. So
amazing.
majority of people, I understand the concept.
Cool. That's good. Good start. Sweet. So, the way that this webinar is going to work, or meeting, however we want to call it, is I'm going to quickly just go over some basic background information. And this is not intended to be a rejig sales pitch in any way, but I want to talk about the way that we think about reinventing work and the essentially like the formula or the roadmap that we use internally here and what we actually provide and recommend to our customers, because this is going to set the picture as to how you should start thinking about where, how, and why you should apply AI at work. And then after just a few slides, I'm going to actually dive in and share my screen and start building the agent. And like I mentioned, it's going to be a relatively simple agent for this one, but a really interesting one. And again, if at any point anyone has a question, just holla. So to set the stage, one of the beautiful things about working at Reejig is that pretty much on any given day, we're having conversations with some of the world's best companies about what they're doing as it relates to bringing AI into their organization, what challenges they're facing, where they're seeing success. Essentially, just getting a lay of the land of what AI at work actually looks like. And I think, again, like I mentioned, for me personally, super, super interested in that. But one of the things that we're constantly hearing from these companies, regardless of the industry that they're in, is that all of them essentially are being told that they need to transform work with AI. But a lot of them don't necessarily understand what that exactly means or where they should be starting, what they should be doing, how to do it, and then also if things are working. So those are great to hear that those questions are being asked. Even better is having a framework or an understanding of how we can start answering those questions. And again, at Rejig, like that's essentially what we do. Our software platform, our SaaS platform, is going to provide a lot of the answers to what that process internally should look like. And what we've found, again, from speaking to a lot of these companies, is that those who have maybe not had a ton of success in the past with their AI initiatives, it wasn't necessarily for lack of trying. I think if I had to sum up what I hear from a lot of companies, it was really around just not having a well thought out plan or strategy as to how they wanted to bring AI into the organization, right? And what that has resulted in is something that I call uh, pilot purgatory, which is essentially we hear all the time companies are trying and testing things, but not necessarily having success. And instead of taking a step back to develop a sound strategy based on data and other things, they'll just move on to try the next thing, right? And move on to try the next thing. And at Reejig, like I mentioned, we believe very, very strongly that having that plan in place is going to be the key for having success as you try to reinvent work with AI. And we have a sort of roadmap or a blueprint or a plan. We call it something different, depending on who you're talking to. But this is something that we provide to our customers, and we've seen great success with this being what is followed. And we call it internally, and I guess externally as well, right? The Reejig reinvention flywheel. And it's made up of essentially 8 different parts that keep continuously looping due to the improvements that you see across the board. And I'm not going to spend time going across the entire flywheel, but for this specific session today, I do want to highlight the very beginning. So essentially the first 3 pieces, which I think are the most important parts to getting started on your AI journey. So the first thing that I want to call attention to is this idea that we have, or maybe it's a misconception of an idea that people outside of Reejig have, in that AI is going to replace people, right? We don't believe that at all. In fact, I would actually strongly say I disagree with that statement. What we believe and what I believe personally is that AI is going to replace work, right? And if you think about what work is, work is not tied directly to a person. Work is tied directly to tasks and subtasks that certain people would be responsible for doing. And when we're thinking about building a strategy or a roadmap for what AI transformations should look like in the workplace, the first step is that you need to have an understanding of the work that's actually taking place. So you need to have visibility into the tasks and subtasks that people are doing, because it's going to be those tasks and subtasks that are either going to be candidates for automation or augmentation through AI. So first step, need to have visibility into the work that is happening. And at Reejig, our platform actually does this manually. I think a lot of companies probably, in the past had tried to do this manually. The Reejig platform will come in based on our work ontology data. We'll look at all of the work that's taking place across your organization, and we'll give you that visibility so you can see down to the subtask level what's actually happening. The second step now is going to be, once you've identified the work that's taking place, so the tasks and subtasks, now you want to start thinking about which of those tasks or subtasks should or could actually be automated or augmented using AI. So this is actually like a really important step. And again, we've seen people try to do this manually. The Reejig platform will actually do this automatically. So the Reejig platform will do what we call an AI impact analysis across those tasks. We'll provide a metric that says, hey, here are all the tasks that are candidates for this AI reinvention, this work reinvention, and then it'll allow these companies to sort of prioritize that. And typically, there's a proprietary algorithm that's going to determine a lot of that. But if you want to step away from the technology jargon and just think at a high level, you're going to be looking for tasks that essentially either amplify revenue within your organization, are low value, so things that maybe people shouldn't necessarily be doing, tasks that are really designed to protect the core business, tasks that can free up time so that your employees and your human workers can spend more time on creative and innovation projects, or tasks that we call no joy tasks, right? And for me personally, when I'm thinking about life outside of work, I think about all the things that I need to do oftentimes that are like no joy, and I'll look to automate those. I'll do the same at work as well. So once you sort of have gone through and you have the visibility into all the work and all the tasks and subtasks that are happening, and then you've looked at them on a task by task level to understand where it makes the most sense for AI to potentially come in to help out. The last thing that you're going to want to do is you're going to want to think about what that workflow is. So you're going to want to think about what that work looks like today with the people that are actually doing it. What are the steps involved to sort of check off the box for that specific task? And you're essentially going to use that blueprint of that workflow to now redesign that work in an automated way. And then that's going to essentially be your instructions, for lack of better terms, on how to go ahead and actually build an agent to do those tasks and subtasks. So before I flip over to now actually building the agent, I want to pause to see if there are any questions up to this point, because I do think, while most people think it's really the exciting part seeing the agent being built, I personally find the roadmap and the thinking and the planning and the strategy piece to be pretty exciting. So Kirst, any questions that have come in on chat? Otherwise, we'll keep rolling.
Nothing in the chat, but anybody who would like to come off mic and speak, please do, or you can drop it in the chat and I will let Jeff know.
Amazing. Cool. So before I switch over to my other windows into my browser and start building, let me set the scenario for what we're going to be doing today. So like I mentioned, we're going to pretend that we've already made the work visible. We see all the tasks and subtasks that are taking place in our organization. We're going to zero in on the HR function for this session, and in future sessions, I promise we'll go outside of HR. But we are big believers that HR is an important bit of an organization as relates to designing what work looks like in the future. But for this example, we are in HR. We're looking at the role of an HRBP, which is an HR business partner. If some of you who are joining us today are not in the HR space, and we're going to look at some of the tasks and subtasks that they do. And we talked about looking for things that are maybe low value, maybe often repetitive, maybe what we call no joy tasks. And for today's example, we're going to think about a task that a lot of these HR BPs have to do pretty much on a daily basis, which is simply respond to either phone calls, Slack messages, Teams messages of business stakeholders and managers, asking them questions about how they should respond to employees and things around employee questions like, what's the return to work policy, or can I bring my dog to the office, or all of these things. So, today, without sort of the AI automation, like that task is pretty manual, right? They need to sort of answer that call, or find the Slack message or Teams message. They need to now pull up their library of company policies, find the right policy that has an answer to the question that's being asked. They then have to think about the best way to provide the policy response back to the manager so that the manager knows the best way to relay that information back to the employee. So it's a repetitive process. It involves essentially knowledge retrieval, knowledge transmission. The good news is that that's like a prime candidate for something that we can go ahead and automate. So I am going to switch over here to Copilot Studio. So for today's build, we are going to be building this in Microsoft Copilot Studio. And the reason for that is this Copilot Studio is a very popular agent building solution that you find in corporate America, right? A lot of companies have standardized on Microsoft Office or Microsoft 365. And Copilot Studio would be an example of like a no-code, low-code agent builder that is typically approved in companies. What I'm going to walk you through and sort of the general concepts of this build can be applied to any no-code or low-code solution. So it may look a little different if you have something else in your company, but the ideas and general principles are going to be the same. And the last thing I'll say before I dive in is, even though we're building this specific agent around this HR BP use case, again, the general concepts of what I'm building could actually be applied to a different use case or a different functional area. So that being said, I will go ahead and we'll dive in. So what you would do to start. So typically you're going to be, if you log into Copilot Studio, you're going to start off on this home screen. And to go ahead and build an agent, you're going to click on the little agent tab, and you would normally click create blank agent. Now, one thing to know about Microsoft Copilot Studio is that when you go to build a blank agent or a new agent, it's going to actually start provisioning that agent, and it takes a few minutes. So I've done my best in my preparation here to try to remove all of those moments where you and I would just both either be staring at each other or staring at a blank screen with a little spinny icon. So I've gone ahead and I've clicked create blank agent right before this webinar started, which would pull up essentially this agent building window here. So when we're building these agents, there's going to be several steps that are involved to build them. And like I mentioned again, right, these steps are going to be very similar if you're using something other than the Copilot Studio. But the first step is we want to provide this agent a name. So this part may seem pretty trivial, but to be honest, it's actually a very important piece as it relates to building agents in like a corporate environment. Because typically, let's do this live. Typically, what's going to happen is that you're going to have a bunch of people in your organization, a bunch of builders that are building these agents. And then when these agents are published, they're going to be published to the corporate library. So they're going to be available for other people to leverage in the things that they're trying to do. So rule of thumb is when you're naming these agents, you need to name them in a way where you're thinking that this name of this agent is not just for you. It's really for everybody across the organization. So you want the name to be pretty clear as to what that agent's actually gonna go ahead and do. So for this example, we're going to be very literal and say this is an HRBP. I don't know why I put a space there. HRBP manager response agent. So again, first step, name it, make sure it's a name that will make sense to somebody at your company who you haven't given an explanation of what this does. The second step, and this is something that a lot of people actually skip over, is providing a description for your agent. Again, keep in mind when you're building these agents in this corporate environment, these may be available for everyone. So if they can't quite understand what the agent is trying to do from the name, let's make sure that we provide a description so that they can at least understand what the agent's purpose is based on the description. So once you have the name and the description, we're going to go ahead and we're going to save it. And then the next step is now thinking about the LLM, the large language model that you want to go ahead and use for this agent. And in Copilot Studio, it does allow you to use agents from third parties. So in our environment here, we have models available from OpenAI, so ChatGPT, and models available from Anthropic, which is Claude. Claude is sort of the flavor of the week. If you've been listening to news or reading anything about AI, ChatGPT is sort of the established sort of guard here. For this specific example, I'm going to use GPT 4.1 because it's probably the most versatile low usage model. A question that I often get at this point when I do these sessions is like, what's the difference between the models? Or like, what model should I choose? So the answer to that is my favorite answer in the world, which is it depends, right? So it's really going to be dependent on what you're trying to achieve. But I would say for most, we'll say, simple to mid complexity models, you're probably going to be perfectly fine using GPT 4.1 or using Sonnet 4.5. You can also use some of the others like Gemini or Llama if you really use Llama, all of those things, Copilot, whatever. So for this one, we're going to use 4.1 because it's relatively simple. It's just retrieving some knowledge. If you were building an agent that was going to be doing more complex reasoning or more research, then you probably would want to use one of the reasoning models. So either GPT-5 reasoning, Opus, again, depending on what you're trying to achieve. If you're sort of unsure and you think what you're trying to build is maybe could be complex, could be simple, you're not quite sure. You could also use GPT-5 Auto, which is actually going to look at what you're trying to achieve and it's going to select the best model for you. So I'm going to pause because I normally get questions here on models and give everybody an opportunity to either ask a question, raise their hand. I'm going to take a swig of Gatorade and then we'll keep going if nobody has a question. But Kirst, if there's a question, let me know.
There is a question from Sandhya saying, can we do the same with Copilot Agent Builder if I don't have Studio?
Great question. So the answer is not like you're going to see here. So unfortunately, not necessarily. So that is a point that I should have made earlier, which is Copilot, which almost everybody at an organization has access to, is different than Copilot Studio, which is essentially the Copilot agent builder. Not everybody at an organization is going to have Copilot Studio, I'd say today. But if I were to sort of look into my crystal ball into the future, I probably would say that you're going to increasingly see more and more people have access to this so that they can start building their own agents because I think we are going to see the trend. And again, we are huge proponents of this where we want more and more people to be builders, right? Because again, if you're thinking about visibility into work and you're thinking about the tasks and subtasks, a lot of times nobody understands those tasks and subtasks better than the person that's actually doing them. So when it comes to building these agents and creating these prompts, which we'll talk about in a second, that person's going to be a really great person to sort of take the knowledge that they have here, put it into prompt form so that the agent's actually going to behave in a way that's, as close to what this looked like sort of in the old way of work. So what I can say though is if you do not have access to Copilot Studio, I've heard from a few people that have been on previous sessions that they've gone to I guess IT or whomever and asked for permission to get access to it. And some of them have actually been given access. So if you don't have access to Copilot Studio, my recommendation would be just ask whomever the powers to be are at your organization if it's something that they can grant for you. And they very well may do that. Right. So cool. Any other questions, Kirst?
Yes, one more from Chelsea. Chelsea, I know that you put your hand up. I don't know if you want to come off mic now or if you'd like me to read your question out loud.
Yeah, I was
Come
just,
on. Yeah.
no worries. I was just looking at this and trying to figure out if there's a technical reason why you wouldn't just create one agent for both manager and employee questions, or should you create two?
So it's going to be that's a great question. And I'm not an HR person, but here's my understanding because I spent a lot of time in this space. Um, because it is still AI, right? And because a lot of the AI, because a lot of the HR policies um, are very defined and things need to be followed in a specific way, a lot of organizations feel that it's really important to keep a human in the loop. And that human in the loop that they want as part of this process is going to be that HRBP. So it's just like another line of defense to ensure that what's being relayed back to the manager like passes all the checks and balances. There is a possibility that if you were to allow the manager to directly have access, which it's funny because when I was preparing this, I was like, oh, like we should just make this available to the manager, and then you can loop out the HRBP and let them do the more exciting stuff. I think that the feeling is if you were just to make it available specifically or directly to the manager, that there may be more scenarios where if AI were to return, let's say, like an incorrect answer or word things in a different way, that would open up more liability for the manager to just go with what AI is telling them. So I think it's just really in this specific uh, case, it's just that human in the loop factor, I think. But again, I'm not an HR person, so
No, I think
that I
my
don't know.
question is slightly different. I
Okay.
agree with everything that you just said. An HRBP or an HR person should definitely be in control of the answers and make sure that they're correct. I just meant like if the question is how many vacation days does a
Yes.
policy have? Why wouldn't you make this agent
Yes.
available to all employees and not just managers?
So the answer is in that scenario, yes, 100% you probably would do that, right? So
Okay.
what you could do, right, is you could actually almost I'm going to say stack rank, but that's probably the wrong word. You probably also want to look at your policies and maybe sort of segment them to say like like a vacation policy, like there's probably very little variance and risk with just letting someone know how many sick days they get, right? Or how many vacation days they get. So in that case, and I've seen that case in real life at like organizations I've been where it's just like, yeah, go ahead and just ask the agent in like Slack or Teams, like how many vacation days do I get? And it's just going to give you an answer. It's perfect. I think it's for things around like performance review stuff or compensation questions, like those you would want to go. So
Yeah,
to answer your question, yes, I believe you are correct in that you probably would create multiple depending on the complexity, the severity, the confidentiality that's involved in the questions. So yes, the answer is yes. Build multiple. Cool. Anything else, Kirst, or
No.
cool.
No.
All right. So now we're going to move on to the next step. And it's funny. I was talking to Kirst earlier and I was like, Kirst, I think we're going to try to bang this out in 30 minutes. I think we have our answer. Not going to happen. So,
No, sir.
and if anybody does need to leave early, don't worry. We are recording this and we will send the recording afterwards. But now that I've said that, please stay. So the next step is going to be probably the most important step when we're talking about building out these agents, and that's going to be the agent instructions. And what's labeled as instructions, that's just a different way to essentially say prompt, right? So, the golden rule of agent building is that your agent is only going to be as good as the prompt or instructions that you give it. And this is going to be the skill, like the AI skill, I say, that is going to take the most time to master. But once you actually understand how to write really, really good prompts, the quality of the output of your agents and even just your overall AI usage is going to exponentially improve. And then when you get to that point, like that's when you really can start seeing maximum value for using AI to help you, whether individually, whether to automate workflows and all of those. So what I would say about getting good at prompting, the way that you do that is by writing tons and tons and tons of prompts. And in the early days, so I think, a lot of, some of you have said you're relatively still on that early portion of the AI journey for yourselves personally. Just start thinking about writing prompts. Start understanding that the best prompts are often going to be the longest prompts, which I always find to be funny because my wife, who sometimes works at home when I'm working at home, she'll come over, look over my shoulder to see what I'm doing, and I'm on like Claude or whatnot, and writing in a prompt. And my wife says, and she jokes that I'm writing novels to AI. And then I'll go into her office, I'll look at what she's doing, and she writes like one sentence. And then she always wants to know why the things that I get out of AI are better than the things she gets out of. And it's because you just want to have really, really good prompts. So if you're new to prompting, I think the best way to write good prompts is you would use AI to help you write a good prompt. So Microsoft Copilot actually has something called Prompt Coach. Prompt Coach is free. It's available for anybody that has Copilot. So you don't need to have Copilot Studio for that person that asked. You would just go to Copilot 365 and you would look for this agent called Prompt Coach. So it's going to be one that's previously built. It's built by Microsoft. And what Prompt Coach does is it essentially just allows you to sort of tell it what you're trying to do in very plain language. And then it will take that context for what you're trying to do and it will format it in a new prompt that you can then copy and paste. So for this example, and it was funny, me trying to do this as I was like trying to type it in, like using very plain language, I found myself like typing it in as like a good prompt. So this is maybe not a great example, but I just want to show you. So you could literally just say, hey, here's what I'm trying to do, right? Give it all of sort of the rules, the guardrails, basically everything. You don't have to think about it as you're writing a prompt. Just think about it as I'm brain dumping into this prompt coach what I want my agent to do. And then when you actually submit it, it will go ahead and do the work to go ahead and create a final prompt in a very organized and structured manner that contains all of the bits and bobs that you need in a successful and effective prompt. And then you can just copy and paste this prompt right back into the prompt section of the agent that you're building. So I'll do that in a second. But I wanted to also let everyone know that as you're thinking about how to get better at writing prompts, there's a few things that I would recommend. The first is to actually like understand like the formula, the quote unquote formula that makes for a good prompt. So there's five things that all these prompts, especially as it relates to the prompts for the agents, should contain. The first is the role. So you want to tell the agent who it is. Very, very important. So if we're saying, hey, this is going to be for an HR business partner, like tell it like you're an HR business partner. You want to give it the rules. So you basically want to tell it like what it should do. You want to give it the inputs, which is essentially like where should it go look for the data? And we're going to talk a little bit more about that when we get down to the knowledge part. You're going to want to provide it the expected output. So what should the answer that you give look like? How should it be structured? How should it look and feel, right? We'll talk a little bit about that also as it relates to knowledge. And then the last one is you want to give it guardrails, which is essentially like, what is the tone that you want the agent to have? What are the limitations in the scope that it should do, right? So you want to not only tell it what it should do, you also want to tell it what it should not do. Because what you don't want happening is if there's a gray area that your agent is going out and trying to retrieve an answer, if there's a gray area, you don't want it to infer an answer that's not accurate or true. So especially for things like this, you want to have those guardrails in place and you want to let it know, like if it doesn't quite know what it wants to return as an answer, that it probably should not return an answer. Or it should just say, hey, listen, like go escalate this to the human or things of that sort. So I'm going to pause talking about prompts, questions around prompts, throw them in the chat or raise your hand and I'll give you a second because this is also another part where a lot of questions typically come on in.
James has come off mic.
Yeah.
James. Was that purposeful?
Not
No.
purposeful.
Oh.
All right.
I have
Yes.
a question.
Sure, go ahead.
Did you already define, you probably defined what you want the agent to do? Did you already define the sources or where it should work from?
So not yet. That's going to be the next part.
Okay.
But I've sort of defined it because again, I'm just in this session, like I'm just going to go logical down step by step as like Copilot Studio is set up. But there should always be pre-planning, right? When you're thinking about agents that you're building. So you should already in your mind know essentially what data sources you want this agent to access and whether or not you want this agent to have the ability to go out to the internet to do research and pull data in. So in the prompt, and you should see on screen now, this is the prompt. This is the ultimate prompt that I wrote for this specific agent. You'll see in this prompt, I've more or less told it like what data or knowledge it's going to have access to, and then I will provide the data as well in the next step. But let me quickly go through this prompt just to show you that you want to make sure that it is very structured and you're providing it all the things that you want. So again, purpose, right? The role, the who. So, the what. This agent supports HRBPs, drafting responses to manager questions, produces policy-aligned guidance, rules for what the manager can and cannot say. Remember, we want to make sure we have both ends of that spectrum covered. Suggested talking points and escalation paths. Amazing. This is the purpose of the agent. Now, here are the guidelines, right? So we want it to be formal, professional, supportive. We want it to always align with policy. So now we're starting to set the seed that's like, listen, like you got to pull from our policy. We're telling it explicitly, do not infer, assume, or hallucinate beyond the documented guidance. So we're going to provide the documentation. And we're telling it to never provide personal or confidential information. We're giving it step-by-step logic. So what's really interesting about this agent that we're building, in addition to just retrieving the policy information, it's also going to recommend how that manager relays that information to the employee using a specific framework. So I've actually like created a document that like outlines like these frameworks so that it knows if it's, for example, a question around performance or behavior, it's going to use this SBI model, right? Which is like situation, behavior, impact. If it's a different type of question, it's going to use these different models. I don't know much about the models, but these are ways of conveying the information. And then we're going to tell it sort of how to structure that response, right? So it's like, here are the sections that we want. Here's what we want you to do. And then again, right, setting the guardrails. So if the scenario can't be answered by the policies that it's pulling or the frameworks, like it needs to not try to make up an answer. It needs to be very transparent and say, listen, I can't provide guidance on this scenario. Like, go talk to the human. So again, you want to have those guardrails in place because they're really, really important. Any other questions on the prompts before we keep rolling?
Could you go in the chat?
We're good?
Yep, good.
Okay, cool. So next, instructions, right? So we have an amazing prompt. We've worked with AI to create this prompt. We go ahead and we copy and paste the prompt in here. And this is essentially the instructions for how the agent is going to behave. So we're going to save that. And now we're going to come down to the next section, which is probably the most important section after the prompt, which is the knowledge, right? So this is going to be where we tell the agent where it is allowed to pull data and information from and where it should not, right? So in Microsoft Copilot Studio, the way that you would do that is you would add knowledge. And something that I like to do is oftentimes in these organizations, they'll have a SharePoint site that has like all the information around specific functions or things. So you could literally just attach that SharePoint site as the knowledge base for that specific agent. Or if it's like only like a few files and not sort of the whole library, you can just drop them into a OneDrive folder and then allow it to access the full folder, or if it's just certain files within that you want to, you can just allow it to access those certain files. I'm not going to do that right now, only because Copilot Studio takes several minutes to actually make that knowledge accessible. So what I've done is I built this agent out before this. It's the same exact thing. Nothing has changed. And I already added the knowledge here. So the knowledge that I added is I added a folder of all of our HR policies. So the agent now has access to all of those policies. And in those policies are going to be things like, there we go. Going to be things like leave policy, right? Code of conduct, conflict of interest. So like all of our HR policies are in that folder. This agent has access to all of them. And then I've also created a document that actually provides a lot of context around those frameworks that we referenced in terms of like how we want to actually relay this message here. So that's something that you can do too. So like as an example here, you could actually have go into Copilot, ask it to do some research on the 3 best frameworks for providing feedback, outline what those are, blah, 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 export that as a document. Document now becomes a source of knowledge so that it has the background on what those frameworks are, how they work, what expected output should be. So we've added the knowledge here. So now it knows I'm going to go look at the frameworks document when I'm deciding whether to use the GROW model or the SBI model. I'm going to look at the policies to actually get answers to the questions as it relates to those policies. And then very, very, very important for this specific agent, by default, Copilot Studio will have web search turned on. We do not want that to be turned on here because we want to have those guardrails in place. We don't want it to go out and find an HR policy from a different company and then use that to inform its answer. We don't want that to happen. We need to disable that. So very, very important to do that. And we now essentially have our agent built. So the next step is that we want to go ahead and test it to make sure that it does what it needs to do. So Copilot Studio has a testing functionality. Typically, when you're building, this will be visible by default. If it's not, you just click that little, I think it's a beaker test button here, and you can go ahead and test your agent. So let me go ahead and throw in an example here. So let's just say, okay, manager's asking how to address repeated lateness. So it's going to take a moment. It's going to start running. It's going to look at the knowledge sources. In a second, it should provide a formatted answer for me. And there we go. So it's going to give me the policy aligned guidance. It's going to tell me which framework I should use to provide this answer out. It's going to tell the manager what they can and cannot say. And it's also going to tell them when they should just escalate it up to the BRBP, right? So agent works. It's always a great thing when I do these sessions and the agent works. You could also do some like what they call like negative testing just to see if it returns an answer when it shouldn't. So I'm going rogue here. I have not scripted this, so this may not work, but it's like, can an employee bring an Xbox to work? Let's see what it answers here. Hopefully it says no, but you never know. The Reejig policies may actually say that we can. So no explicit policy about Xbox. Okay, cool. It's funny though. It's like I'm concerned this could impact productivity if you bring this in. So again, it'll do that. If I ask something about compensation, which if you remember the instruction said never answer that, it would say no, escalate this. I can't answer that. So now that we know that it's working and we feel good, we would then publish this. This one has already been published. Once it's published, that's when we can sort of put it into action. So I'll show you that in 1 second. But what I want to say before we jump to the next and final step is that when we talked about prompting, the only way to just get to the absolute best prompt that you can get to is by dropping your prompt in, doing some testing, looking at the results that you're getting, and seeing if there's anything that you want to be a little bit different, if there's certain things that need to be improved. If so, go back to the prompt, edit the prompt, test it again. What I've found personally is when I'm creating prompts, I mean, I'm going back and forth with my prompt and modifying it for a decent amount of time. Again, until the point where I feel really confident and really happy with the results that I'm seeing. So don't think that, that first attempt of that prompt that you put in there is going to be the ultimate prompt that you're going to use. Chances are it's not. You're going to want to test, you're going to want to learn, you're going to want to improve.
Can I interrupt, Jeff?
Absolutely.
Quickly, sorry, just a couple of questions.
Yeah.
Chelsea, another question from Chelsea is, do you know if there is a way to make the agent not visible to everyone within Copilot Studio?
Yeah, so you can. So I'll show you that. Well, yes, there's permissions on Copilot. So you could actually build agents that are just visible to you. You can share with your team. It's all on the admin side. So that, yes, there are guardrails in terms of visibility. Also, what I'm going to do next is I'm going to push it into like Microsoft Teams. So you can have it so that it's only available in like certain Teams channels. So that's another guardrail that you could put in place too. You could also, if you wanted this to be like a scheduled agent. So this is a bad example because this is going to be the trigger is going to be somebody asking the questions. But like let's say, last week we built an agent that went out and found current HR compliance news, and it did it every week, every Monday at 8 a.m. When you're building out the automation piece on that, you can say, hey, when you run, I want you to email this only to this distribution list, or I want you to Teams this only to these people. So you can, there's a lot of different ways to determine the usage of the agent and the accessibility of the output. So hopefully that answers your question.
And one more.
Oh, sorry.
Go on, Kelly.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Thank you. I just and this may not be the right time, but can you talk a little bit too about there's just the concept and thought process of how to manage, right, the data, like how often you keep it updated, like the responsibility that people have who build the agents, right? I mean, is there like best practices and things like that you might just take us through a high level?
Yeah. So at a very high level, right, the agent only knows where to pull from, right? But if you're using like a SharePoint as an example as your knowledge source, or if you're using like a folder, like a shared folder on OneDrive, like those documents should, right? And I say should in quotes, like should be updated as needed by whoever is the document owner. So once it's updated and saved up in OneDrive or on the SharePoint, the agent is going to pull the most up-to-date knowledge there, right? So there's that. The other things that you could do if you wanted to build more complexity into your agent is you could instruct it. So like let's say that the knowledge base has, I don't know, I'm just going to say, let's say you're pulling articles as an example. And let's say there's 12 articles that span like the last year. You could put guardrails in terms of telling the agent that you only want to pull from the knowledge base, the articles that are within the last 7 days, as an example. That's like what we did last week for the compliance. Like the agent was explicitly told, like, only pull stuff like from the last 7 days. So like there's different ways to do it, but like you should just make sure that the document owners, so like in this case, the policy owners, are updating as they need to be updated and then that they're stored in that knowledge base or the SharePoint set or wherever where the agents are pulling from. So I don't know if that answered your question exactly, but like I think that's probably the best practice.
I see that somebody else came off of mic, but I'm just going to quickly ask Catherine's question. So the information on what the manager can and cannot say, where is that derived from?
So this is going to come from the policies, the documents that are stored.
Good one. And I think that Ashlyn Savage came off mic, but I'm not sure if that was on purpose.
No.
Not on purpose. Continue.
Okay, all good. So last thing, we built the agent. The agent's amazing. It's going to save me as an HRBP tons of time so that I can go work on the other stack of 10,000 things that I have to do. Now we need to make this accessible. So once it's published, so publishing is the critical first piece. We then need to decide like what channels do we want to make this agent available on. And there's lots of different places. I mean, you can literally have it as a Slack agent. You can have it as a Twilio, which would allow it to like text message people. I don't know why you'd want to do that for this one. But what we're going to do in this example is we want to make it available in Microsoft Teams. So you would go to channels, you would go to Teams. I already added it, but there would be a button here that's like add to Teams. You would go ahead and do so. You would click See Agent in Teams, and I have that up here. And then basically what you would have is you would have that agent now who you can chat with in Teams as though we're a real person. First time you use it, it's going to just ask for some permissions, but you would just type as though you're typing to your HRBP what question you have. So this would be the manager, obviously, right? And then you would get your agent doing the work on the back end, returning its answer output right here in chat. So you can have that either standalone as its own little agent where anybody can access it. You can have it work within a channel. So you could easily just say, you know what, I don't want it accessible to everybody. I just want it to be in the HRBP channel. And then you have an agent. And we did it in under an hour. So amazing. So questions. This is the Q&A time. So let me actually go back here. Cool. So if you have a question, drop it in. If you have a specific agent that you would like us to build in a future session, drop that in as well, because this is a weekly session. So I will be building these agents every week. And eventually we will be looking for ideas because we have a bunch now, but we also want to build things that are relevant to all of you as well. So if you have an idea for an agent, drop it in the chat. We'll be looking at the chat transcript afterwards. If you would love to potentially do something where we do an in-person live workshop, much more detail, work with your executives to map out the work that's happening and where it makes sense for you to potentially build AI agents. We do offer a very limited amount of those every quarter. I think we still have some slots open. We'll be sending an email after the fact with information there. So if you're interested in that, we can send you some information if it's something that might make sense for your org. And then also, I tell everyone all the time, Kirst, did you drop my LinkedIn into the chat? Yep.
I did. Yes.
Awesome.
I will share it again.
Connect with me on LinkedIn. I love chatting about this stuff. I will accept your invitation if you send it to me. And last thing, what am I forgetting, Kirst?
I have just dropped a link to get your AI impact analysis if you would like
Perfect.
to get that. And we also have the results from the poll now that we had all of we had 100% of people vote that were here today.
Woohoo!
You
All
want to go
right.
over those results?
I love that. So amazing. So yeah, so real quick. So again, you will get the recording in an email. You will get, I believe there's a link in the chat. I can't see the chat, sorry. But you'll probably get it in the email as well. We offer something called an AI impact analysis. So when you remembered me talking about the sort of first three steps of trying to understand where AI should make the most sense for your organization, we make that work visible. We look at the tasks. We provide sort of an AI impact score, which allows you to sort of prioritize where you want to start building. It's also really great too to have that analysis because then you can hand that over to IT or the technical people if they're the ones that are sort of managing sort of the build out. And then they have a good starting point. So they're not building blindly. So if you're interested in getting that for your industry and your organization, request those. Those we provide to everybody. So go ahead, fill out that form. We'll get that over to you, and then we'll have one of our work engineers reach out to walk you through the results so you can understand what you're seeing in that analysis. And then the last thing I'll say about the email that we're going to send you, we love feedback on these sessions. I love feedback on these sessions. Whether it's positive feedback and you're saying, Jeff, you're the best ever, or if it's Jeff, you talk too slow. I've never heard that before, by the way. Provide the feedback. Let us know, like, what can we do to make these better? Because we're doing these for all of you out there. We want all of you, and we really, really believe this, to become builders. We want people to feel really confident that they can leverage AI to reinvent their work and reinvent the work in their organizations. So with that, with 4 minutes to spare, I'll let any last second questions come on. If not, I will wish everyone a happy opening day if you love baseball. I was telling Kirst, I am a diehard Mets fan. They are playing right now, and I have not looked at the score, so no spoilers in the chat. But it's a fine spring day and a great day for baseball. So thank you everyone for joining. Kirst, any last questions trickling in?
Just a hand raise from Erwin.
Erwin, come on.
Hi, Jeff. I'll make this a quicker question than I was going to ask.
Okay.
So the agent that's building this, that's going to take several hours, even a day. It doesn't seem that complicated. But proofing and rechecking and doing all the data that you're importing into the system,
Mhm.
how long is that going to take? That's quite a load of information, and then cross-checking
Yeah.
it, et cetera.
So it's a great question, right? And it's probably a really long answer. But what I would say is I think what we're going to end up seeing as organizations sort of start doing more and more and more of this is we're going to actually start seeing like an evolution of work and responsibilities on the human side. Because again, there is always going to be a human component, right? So your point, Erwin, okay, the AI can go retrieve the data, but somebody's got to be on top of the data, right? So I think what you're going to see is you're going to see organizations do probably two things, at least two things, maybe some more, where they're going to have somebody that's sort of responsible for managing the agents, first of all, right? So almost like thinking about the agents as employees, and they'll have a manager who needs to go in every once in a while, maybe do a performance review, maybe do some edits, some course correcting. And then you're going to have data policies that are going to drastically change within organizations where there's going to be a higher priority on like data cleanliness, right? Data relevance, um, data currency in terms of just making sure that the data is up to date. So I think that's what we're going to start to see. So we're going to see somebody that ultimately will have responsibility over just monitoring of the agent and improvement on the agent side. So again, like I mentioned, like that prompt can be improved. Things are going to change too as the AI technology changes and gets better, right? So like there's going to be someone there. And then on the data side, like somebody's going to have to make sure that data is up to date, that data is available. Something that I think will be a challenge is there's going to be new data that doesn't exist today that will exist, let's say 3 months from now. That's going to be really critically important for this AI, right? So you want to make sure that that agent or that data, sorry, is incorporated in a way where it becomes part of that knowledge source. So that's why I think you're going to see a lot of these like companies also like moving to a SharePoint, which is a place where they normally would just make sure that any new data or any new sources would be placed. And then the AI will get better at sort of looking at these SharePoint sites, pulling relevant information. So sort of an answer for your question, but it's a great question. I don't know that there's all the answers yet, but I think that these are the types of questions that people need to start thinking about as they start thinking about sort of reinventing the work.
Thanks, Jeff. I get it.
No problem. Cool. Well, with that, if there's no other questions, we'll end it from here. And then I invite everybody, join us next week too. We would love to see you every week. I believe when you were probably invited the first time, there's links for the others. If not, that email that we send you afterwards will have links to all the scheduled upcoming sessions. So again, don't feel like you've come to one. You're not allowed to come back. We want everyone to come back and see us again. So thank you so much, guys. I appreciate it. Hopefully we'll see you next week.
Thank you.